value? Is it desirable? Is it a choice? Is it an expectations? Is it a pragmatic goal that we have? And that is really to ask us to frame the discussion about whether this expectation is stronger than merely a claim. Is it a right? So another way of framing my presentation over here is to think about whether multiculturalism is in fact a human right, and whether it has certain clear objectives such as empowerment through community or even gender equality. So let me start off by asking ourselves the question, when we talk about multiculturalism, why are we talking about multiculturalism? I guess it's because of our expectation that social cohesion, well-being of societies, and a variety of other things. But is it possible for us to take it, one step higher than that in terms of actually outcomes? So I'm referring to the World Urban Forum, which is to take place in Abu Dhabi in February 2020, which actually lists culture and innovation, interestingly, as ways of achieving sustainable development. So if we can think about culture with the dichotomy that we have right now, we speak about culture in sociological terms as cultural practice or custom. On the other hand, in business, they talk about culture of achievement, innovation, leadership. Can those two actually come together? So let's pause for a moment and think about how we can sell multiculturalism, not only as an inherently important process and goal, but also something that is productive and eventually, results-based approach for the prosperity of society itself. And I'm alluding here to the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course are underlined in many ways with references to people's choices, communities, and custom, but very specifically in the context of sustainable urbanization, actually recognize culture and heritage as one of the pillars of sustainability. Now, this is new. It's been part of the discourse, of course, but for it to enter the global development agenda is quite remarkable. Now, this has implications because we're suddenly moving away from the idea of an utopian society, of tolerance, of mingling of cultures, of talking to each other, to something that we would, in the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals, be able to actually measure. So how do you actually measure what goes into multiculturalism, what comes out of it, how do we proceed from where we are and achieve certain targets that are there. And this, of course, is the language of the Sustainable Development Goals, that we're talking about indicators, we're talking about goals, we're not really talking about activities, we're talking about outcomes, we're talking about impact. So are we possible as a community of those who are actually promoting and practicing multiculturalism to be able to convert that good practice into, let's say, policy goals, tools, mechanisms that can actually achieve, let's say, specific outcomes? So I mentioned sustainable urbanization. I think this term is tremendously important for us because we live in a society where one of the greatest drivers of our growth and development progress is in fact urbanization. And urbanization is a very interesting framework to look at almost everything that happens within society. And I'm just going to pick up on something earlier that I've talked about. And I'm in fact here in Malaysia as part of meeting several people on talking about human rights-based approaches to women's leadership and empowerment. Let me just explain this. We all know what human rights is. Human rights are declarations, provisions that are there in international instruments that we can actually talk about. We know that they are selective, we know that they can be political. But human rights-based approach is actually a methodology which asks basic questions such as, in an analysis during a project, have you actually considered all the dimensions of not just universality, inalienability, or interdependence, but have you included everyone? Meaning, have you mapped the stakeholders, recognized their roles, their capacities, and what they can bring on the table, and have they been involved in all aspects of the development of a particular project or an activity, leading to their roles in the implementation, in the evaluation, the monitoring, and so on. So I'm just going to pick up one particular dimension, since time is short, and talk about gender equality. Now let's be very careful about multiculturalism. Multiculturalism appears to be a very convenient conversations of the chosen few within society, sometimes dominant cultures in its term. But culture has always been a problem, because I don't want to get into this whole argument about what is a patriarchal society, but we just need to ensure that when we speak about culture, it is the ownership is with everyone. And when we talk about multiculturalism as a human right, are we talking about all people? And I think many of our speakers have actually addressed this. And when we use culture or religion or other dimensions of community practice as ways and pathways to development, we need to ensure that women's leadership, their voices, their needs, their perspective, their experiences are fully taken into consideration, because we know that we can't have actually wholesome progress. So when we talk about right to a city, we talk about inclusive cities, and of course, in many ways, Malaysia is an example, a complex example, a positive example that is involved. But if culture or multiculturalism is a right, what kind of right are we talking about in terms of human rights? We're talking about in terms of your right to express your culture, a right not to be discriminated or to left behind, the right to be able to participate in the benefits and the development of the society itself. Then you're talking about including every single person in society, women, children, young people, older persons, minority people with disability, and the usual minorities that exist. So some of the work that we are doing at the Center for Islamic Finance, Law and Communities as part of our Global Challenge Research Fund is to look at, for example, land and property rights. And I know that Malaysia has made considerable progress on this, and see how we can use culture and religion as a positive force, as a supplemental force in some ways, and as a primary force in others, to achieve universal goals. So part of this training, working with communities right across, is to look at how women are able to access land and property rights, because they are, in fact, the foundation stones, as has been demonstrated over and over again. So my limited point today, and I'm going to end on this, happens to be that we can talk about multiculturalism at a whole lot of levels of platitudinal levels of abstraction, or expressions of, shall we say, utopia and so on. But I think we need to come in practical terms. If we are through multiculturalism, talking about the role of various cultures, learning from each other, and using culture for development itself, in concrete terms, 1, 2, 3 measures, and we can come back and demonstrate that we've learned from each other, we've done this together, the culture's reference point, I think we've made a tremendous progress, and multicultural would start then to have the credibility and the teeth. So what we need really is tools, and I thought many people spoke very well to talk about legal pluralism, but ensure that culture is reflected for what is indeed the benefit to society and all people, including men and women. Thank you very much.